The hall was silent, lit only by a faint red glow that bled through the curtains. The man on the podium, the one they called the forbidden teacher, stood still for a long moment before speaking. His voice was not loud, but it carried the kind of quiet authority that makes even thoughts kneel. Caring, he began, is the first chain they place around your throat. The audience didn't breathe. His words lingered like smoke. You think caring makes you human, he continued, pacing slowly, but in truth, it makes you predictable. When you care, you reveal what can hurt you. You tell the world where to strike. He paused before a flickering candle, eyes reflecting its dying flame. The world doesn't break you through cruelty. It breaks you through attachment. He told them about a man who once loved a woman so deeply he forgot who he was without her. He stayed awake at night memorizing her silence, mistaking it for peace. When she left, his world collapsed, not because she betrayed him, but because she took with her the illusion that love makes us safe. He didn't lose her because she stopped loving him, the teacher said softly, he lost her because he still cared. The story sank into the audience like poison into water. Some shifted uneasily in their seats. Others lowered their eyes, perhaps remembering someone who had once made them weak. Caring, he whispered, is worshipping another person's shadow. And the more you love that shadow, the less you see yourself. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, or maybe it was the echo of hearts cracking under recognition. He turned toward the dim faces before him. They tell you that not caring is cold, he said, but I tell you, indifference is freedom. The one who cares least always holds the power. For a brief second, the teacher smiled. Not warmly, but knowingly, as if the truth itself amused him. Then his tone hardened. Remember this, control is not taken, it is given away every time you feel too much. The candlelight flickered out completely, leaving only his shadow on the wall, tall, unmoving, eternal. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost intimate. Now, he said, let us study those who understood this truth, the architects of control. And with that, the forbidden lecture deepened. The teacher's shadow still lingered on the wall when he spoke again, his voice cutting through the heavy air like a blade through silk. Emotion is the architecture of control, he said. But not your emotion, theirs. He stepped down from the podium and walked among the silent listeners. His shoes echoed on the marble floor, each step deliberate, like punctuation in a forbidden scripture. Every ruler, every manipulator, every lover who commands obedience, they all understand one secret. People obey not because they are forced, but because they are afraid to lose approval. Fear, not loyalty, is the spine of every empire. He stopped before a trembling young man in the front row, his gaze unblinking. Tell me, the teacher asked, who controls more, the one who demands attention or the one who withdraws it? The student hesitated. The one who withdraws. A thin smile crept across the teacher's face. Correct. Because absence is the loudest weapon. When you withdraw warmth, others begin to freeze, and in their desperation, they move exactly as you wish. He returned to the center, raising his hand as if tracing invisible blueprints in the air. The architecture of control is not built on force. It's built on design, emotional geometry. You give them glimpses of approval, flashes of affection, and then take it away. Soon they begin to orbit you like planets around a dead sun. The whole seemed to tighten around his words. The candlelight flickered nervously, casting long red shadows that trembled like guilty souls. He told them of a prince, centuries ago, who ruled an entire city through silence. The prince never shouted, never punished, never praised. He simply withdrew, and the people, terrified of his indifference, worked harder to earn what would never return. He ruled by doing nothing, the teacher said quietly. His silence became prophecy. And those who sought his favor became slaves to their own imagination. He paused, letting the lesson sink in. The room felt colder now, as if even the air had started to understand. The weak speak, he continued. The powerful watch. The fool demands to be heard, the master lets others explain themselves into submission. A murmur passed through the audience. Some began taking notes, others simply stared, as if hypnotized by the idea that control could be so invisible, so surgical. Then his tone softened, almost like a confession. When you stop caring how they see you, they start seeing you as untouchable. That's how empires are born, not on thrones, but in minds. He moved back toward the podium, eyes distant, as if recalling something personal. Once, he said, I tried to control through affection. I believed love could anchor people. But affection creates expectation, and expectation is the seed of rebellion. A faint smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Now I rule through silence. And silence never betrays. The room fell into complete stillness. Even the candles seemed to listen. Finally, his voice dropped to a whisper. Every structure needs a mirror. Before you build control over others, you must first study your own reflection, your weaknesses, your fears, your illusions of power. He looked up, eyes glinting with quiet menace. Because the first person you must conquer is yourself. The audience leaned forward, caught between fear and fascination. And as the red glow deepened across the hall, the teacher said the words that would lead them further down the spiral. Next, we speak of mirrors, and the dangerous truths they never show. The room was still echoing with the teacher's final words from the last lesson. The first person you must conquer is yourself. A single candle flickered on the podium, its flame bending like a nervous confession. He stepped closer, his reflection appearing in the dark mirror behind him. A mirror, he began, is the cruelest invention of mankind. It shows you not who you are, but what you've become to please others. The audience sat in silence, eyes locked on the shifting glow. When a man looks into a mirror, the teacher continued, he sees his disguise, not his truth. Weakness hides beneath the costumes of virtue, kindness, and love. And yet, these are the very tools through which the world manipulates you. He leaned closer to the reflection, his tone lowering. You believe in honesty, but even honesty is a performance. You confess to those who don't deserve to hear you, hoping your openness will earn affection. But every confession is an offering of power. The hall seemed to tighten, as if the walls themselves were listening. Then he told them about a woman, a student once devoted to the study of control. She asked me, he said, if emotion is weakness, must we kill it? He smiled faintly. I told her no. You don't kill emotion, you use it. He described how she learned to weaponize her tears, how she could make men kneel with a whisper of sadness, and how she turned compassion into control. She cried not because she felt pain, he said coldly, but because she wanted him to. The audience shifted uneasily. Some looked away, others leaned closer, drawn by the quiet darkness in his tone. He raised his hand toward the mirror again. Weakness is never destroyed, he said. It's transformed. Those who deny their weakness become slaves to it. Those who understand it, command it. A silence heavier than guilt filled the room. Then, softly, he added, to know your weakness is to know your price. Once they know what breaks you, they own you. He turned away from the mirror, leaving his reflection trapped in the glass, a ghost of the man he refused to be. 4 centuries, he said, rulers, lovers, and liars have studied this truth. They learned to build their power upon the fear of exposure. And that fear. He stopped, his eyes narrowing, is the true currency of control. He walked back to his seat, the sound of his footsteps measured and final. Now, he whispered, almost to himself, let us speak of the cost of fear, of the price that even the strong must pay to remain untouchable. And as the candle trembled, the red light deepened, ushering the audience toward the next forbidden lesson. The teacher's words about mirrors still hung in the air like ghosts. The audience sat motionless, as if afraid to even blink. Somewhere in the hall, a candle hissed and died, releasing a curl of smoke that rose like a silent scream. When you look into a mirror, he began softly, you expect truth. But when power looks into one, it sees only strategy. He turned toward the crimson walls, his reflection fractured across the polished marble floor. Fear, he said, is the only currency that never loses its value. It is the foundation of obedience, the heartbeat of control. Love fades. Loyalty shifts. But fear endures. The audience listened as if hypnotized. He told them about a general he once knew, a man revered by his army, loved by his soldiers, until he made the mistake of showing mercy. He thought kindness would earn loyalty, the teacher said, his tone laced with pity. But mercy is a confession of attachment. And once they know you need them, they learn how to break you. He described the moment that general lost his power, not on the battlefield, but in the eyes of his men. They saw hesitation in him, and in that hesitation, they sensed weakness. When soldiers stop fearing you, the teacher whispered, they stop fighting for you. He paced slowly, his footsteps echoing like distant drums. You see, fear is not cruelty. It's preservation. The one who inspires fear controls emotion itself. Because fear replaces thought, it commands without words. He paused, letting silence spread through the room like poison. Then, with a slow exhale, he told them a story that was older than kingdoms, a story about a ruler who ruled not by sword, but by absence. The ruler never punished, he said. He simply vanished when displeased. 4 days, his court would tremble, wondering if they had failed him. And when he returned, they offered everything, gold, devotion, even their pride, to restore what they had lost. He did not demand their obedience. They gave it freely, out of fear of losing his shadow. The teacher smiled faintly. That is the purest form of control, when they cage themselves for you. He looked over the audience, his gaze sharp and cold. Never confuse fear with hatred. Hatred is loud, it burns out quickly. Fear is quiet. It lingers. It survives love, time, and even death. He told them how empires rot not from rebellion, but from affection. A ruler who seeks love becomes a beggar, he said, voice darkening. He trades fear for comfort, and comfort for collapse. Someone in the crowd raised a trembling hand. But isn't fear cruel? The teacher turned, his face unreadable. Cruel? He repeated softly. Cruel is pretending to care when you intend to control. Fear, at least, is honest. A ripple of unease passed through the hall. Some listeners shifted in their seats, others stared at the floor, unwilling to meet his eyes. He stepped closer to the audience now, his tone almost intimate. Understand this, people do not follow truth, they follow survival. If they believe you hold the key to their safety, they will chain themselves to you willingly. Fear is not punishment, it is the illusion of protection. He let the word settle before delivering his final blow. The moment you stop needing them, he said, they kneel. The line struck like thunder. For a long while, there was only silence, the kind that tastes like realization. The teacher looked over his students, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Soon, he said, you will see how far people are willing to crawl, just to feel the warmth of someone who doesn't care. The candles flickered again, their flames twisting like nervous hearts. He turned away from the audience, his shadow stretching along the wall. Fear builds the empire, he murmured, but detachment keeps it alive. And with that, he looked back over his shoulder, eyes gleaming with something unholy. Next, he said, we speak of detachment, the final experiment. The air in the hall had changed. Fear still lingered, but now it had matured, it had turned into silence. The teacher stood before his audience, his face half lit by the dying candles, the other half lost in shadow. You've learned how fear commands obedience, he said, voice slow and deliberate. But fear alone is unstable. It needs an anchor, something colder, sharper. That anchor is detachment. He let the word hang in the air like frost. Detachment, he continued, is not the absence of feeling. It is the art of observing emotion without surrendering to it. It is the scalpel that separates power from pain. He paced slowly, eyes scanning the listeners. I once conducted an experiment, he said. Not in a laboratory, but in the hearts of people who thought they could love me. The audience leaned forward, as though drawn into a confession forbidden by law. I became the ghost of warmth, he explained. I offered fragments of affection, a glance, a word, a moment, then withdrew before they could hold it. What happened next was the most terrifying revelation of human nature I have ever seen. He paused, his gaze distant. They didn't grow angry. They grew devoted. The more I withheld, the more they chased. They began to mistake my indifference for mystery, my silence for depth. I learned then, people crave the illusion of being chosen more than the reality of being loved. He stopped pacing, letting his words sink into the crowd like needles. Love can be earned, he said quietly. But indifference must be conquered. That's why they'll do anything for it. He described how one woman from the experiment began writing him letters every night, begging to know what she'd done wrong. Another man offered him gifts just to be seen again. None realized the truth, that their desperation wasn't for affection, but for validation. They don't want your kindness, the teacher said, almost whispering. They crave your indifference. The audience shifted uncomfortably. The teacher's tone darkened further. That's why emotional detachment is the highest form of control. When they realize nothing they do can move you, they break themselves trying. He moved closer to the front row. Remember, he said, the one who feels less, rules more. A murmur ran through the listeners. Some nodded, others looked away, perhaps recognizing the ghosts of their own attachments. Detachment is power, he continued, but it is also isolation. You become the god they worship, and the void they fear. Every empire built on silence eventually hears its own echo. He looked down at the candle in front of him, its flame shrinking like a dying secret. The experiment ended when one of them finally snapped, he said softly. She betrayed me, not out of hate, but out of exhaustion. He raised his head slowly, eyes glinting in the dim red light. And that, he whispered, was when I learned the most painful truth: even control invites betrayal. He turned from the audience, his shadow stretching long across the wall. In our next lesson, he said, we will speak of that betrayal, not as a wound, but as proof of dominion. The hall was colder now. The candles had melted into twisted shapes, their wax pooling like the remnants of forgotten promises. The teacher stood still, the silence around him almost sacred. In our last lesson, he began, we learned that control breeds detachment. But detachment, my dear students, is never final. It calls forth its twin, betrayal. He walked toward the edge of the dais, his steps deliberate, his tone reverent, almost ceremonial. Betrayal, he said, is not chaos. It is a ritual. A sacred exchange between the one who controls and the one who can no longer bear it. The listeners sat rigid, their faces pale under the dim red light. When I spoke of detachment, he continued, I told you how silence enslaves hearts. But silence also provokes rebellion. The controlled must one day seek to reclaim their dignity, and that reclamation always arrives as betrayal. He smiled faintly, the expression neither kind nor cruel. That woman from my experiment did not betray me out of malice. She betrayed me to free herself from the mirror I held before her. Every betrayal is a prayer for liberation disguised as vengeance. He turned toward the tall window, where moonlight filtered through the red curtains like diluted blood. When power has no outlet, he said, it devours itself. The betrayer becomes the instrument of balance, restoring the world to its hidden symmetry. The students exchanged uneasy glances. Some seemed to understand, others trembled, sensing a truth they weren't ready to hear. Never curse betrayal, he said softly. Invite it. Study it. Every knife that enters your back was once a hand reaching for your approval. He clasped his hands behind him. That's why great rulers, philosophers, and lovers never die of betrayal, they are reborn through it. Each wound is an initiation. Each loss, a refinement. He paused, his gaze turning inward. The day she betrayed me, he said, was the day I understood what it means to be untouchable. I felt no anger, no sorrow, only clarity. Her act did not destroy me. It completed me. He looked over the audience, eyes gleaming with a cold fire. If you wish to hold power long enough, do not fear betrayal, design it. Let it arrive on your terms. A betrayal orchestrated is not defeat, it is theater. He let his words settle like dust in the still air. For in betrayal, he whispered, the puppeteer and the puppet become one. The candles flickered, casting shifting shadows across the walls. The teacher's voice sank to a hush. In our next lesson, we will learn how to use that mirror, not to reflect truth, but to reshape it. When betrayal completes its ritual, what follows is not peace, it is obsession. The teacher stood in silence for a long time before speaking again. His eyes lingered on the students as if measuring how deeply they had bled from the previous lesson. Betrayal, he said slowly, does not end a bond. It refines it into something purer, something poisonous. He began pacing the hall, his shadow sliding across the red-stained walls like a serpent. When someone betrays you, he continued, their image doesn't fade. It multiplies. It follows you in the silence of your thoughts, in the trembling of your hands, in the dreams you cannot escape. You stop hating them, because hatred would mean you still have power. Instead, they become your ghost. And you, their priest. The students said nothing. The teacher's words dripped with the weight of experience. Obsession, he whispered, is devotion stripped of hope. He raised a single candle, its flame shaking in the draught. To understand obsession, one must dissect the human need to matter. Every act of control, every betrayal, every tear is born from this need, to be seen, remembered, and worshipped. Even in destruction. He looked up, eyes glinting gold in the dim light. You think the betrayer forgets you? No. They, too, are enslaved, haunted by the echo of what they destroyed. Betrayal binds both sides in invisible chains. One becomes addicted to guilt, the other to longing. Both drink from the same poisoned cup. A low murmur passed through the room. Do you understand now, he said, why power must remain untouched by attachment? The moment you care too deeply, the moment someone occupies your thoughts without permission, you are theirs. They don't need to command you. They already live in your mind. He paused, watching a drop of wax fall to the floor. I once studied a man who lost everything for love. Not because she left him, but because he couldn't stop imagining her. His obsession outlived the relationship. It outlived him. That, my students, is the true cost of feeling too much. The teacher smiled faintly. When Machiavelli wrote that it is safer to be feared than loved, he wasn't rejecting love. He was warning against obsession disguised as affection. Fear ends at obedience. Love, when corrupted, never ends. It consumes. He turned his back to them, facing the window veiled in red silk. True mastery begins when you can observe your own obsession without feeding it. When you can study your hunger as if it belonged to someone else. That is how kings survive heartbreak. That is how tyrants sleep at night. A long silence followed. Only the crackle of the candles filled the space. Then his voice returned, lower, colder. Remember this, obsession is not love, it's memory that refuses to die. And those who cannot kill it, eventually become its offering. He let the candle's flame die between his fingers, smoke curling like a ghost above his hand. In our next lesson, he murmured, we will examine what happens when obsession turns inward, when the mind becomes its own executioner. When the teacher returned the next night, the hall felt different. The red glow that once bled across the walls had faded into a dull ember. The air was colder, heavier, like the breath of a dying empire. He stood before the students, his voice low. Obsession, he said, always ends with absence. When the fire burns through everything, what remains is not love, nor power, it is vacancy. The empty throne. He approached the marble chair that stood at the center of the dais. No one ever sat upon it. Dust had gathered along its arms, yet it gleamed faintly under the candlelight. This, he continued, resting a hand on its surface, is what every ruler, every lover, every mind eventually confronts, the throne without a king. You build your empire of emotions, your fortress of control, your rituals of power, and one day you look around and realize, there is no one left to rule. A shiver passed through the crowd. The throne, he said, is a metaphor, but also a curse. It represents victory without purpose. To conquer all fears, to silence all emotions, to detach from all weakness, sounds divine, doesn't it? But what remains when there's nothing left to lose? He leaned closer, whispering, emptiness. A kingdom of silence. He began pacing, the echo of his steps haunting the chamber. Machiavelli understood this. He warned that the prince who conquers everything must learn to govern himself, or he will destroy his own order. Because when the throne becomes empty, when the soul is drained of desire, madness sits in its place. The students watched as he slowly lowered himself toward the marble seat, but stopped just before touching it. His hands trembled slightly. I once believed detachment was the final freedom, he confessed. But freedom without meaning is exile. The mind begins to eat itself in search of feeling. That's when the ghosts return, the ones you silenced, the faces you forgot, the loves you buried. His eyes drifted toward the window where the night pressed against the glass. The greatest punishment for power is isolation, he said softly. You rise above the crowd only to find the air too thin to breathe. He turned back to his audience, voice sharpening into a whisper that felt like confession. The empty throne is not the end of power, it's its price. A single candle flickered out. The room dimmed. Soon, he said, you will understand that the throne was never meant to be occupied. It exists only to remind us of what we sacrificed to reach it. He paused, looking at the chair one last time, then stepped back into the shadows. In our final lesson, he murmured, we will speak of the last illusion, the lie that even the throne cannot outlast. The hall was nearly dark when the teacher entered for the last time. Only one candle remained lit, its flame trembling as if aware it was being watched. The students sat in silence, waiting for him to speak, but he said nothing for a long while. He simply stood there, motionless, unreadable, like a statue that had forgotten it was once human. At last, he whispered, the throne is empty, but the lesson is not over. His words drifted through the dim chamber like smoke. You have learned of control, of fear, of betrayal, of obsession. You have walked through every corridor of the mind where power hides. But tonight, we arrive at the last door, the truth even Machiavelli did not dare to write. He stepped forward, the candlelight painting half his face in gold, half in shadow. Power is not something you hold, he said. It's something you become. The moment you try to possess it, it begins to rot. That is why kings fall, why lovers destroy each other, why empires crumble. Power feeds on attention, and dies in ownership. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but he silenced it with a glance. You chase control because you fear disappearance. You seek to be remembered. But to rule the human heart, one must first vanish from it. He turned toward the marble throne. It still stood empty, glowing faintly in the dying red light. The greatest illusion, he continued, is that strength lies in domination. It does not. It lies in withdrawal. In the art of absence. He looked over the students, some trembling, others entranced. When you stop caring, they start fearing. Because indifference is a form of godhood. No army can fight silence. No manipulation can move the one who has nothing left to lose. He let the words settle, then spoke softer. But beware, the world will not forgive your stillness. It will call you heartless, cold, cruel. It will try to pull you back into the theater of emotion, because your calmness exposes everyone else's chaos. The teacher's tone shifted, gentle, almost mournful. There was a man once, he said, who loved deeply, ruled wisely, and lost everything. When the final betrayal came, he did not curse it. He only smiled. For in that moment, he realized the truth. Love, loyalty, and fear are all currencies that expire. Only awareness endures. He paused, looking down at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Awareness is not peace, it's exposure. It means seeing the lies that hold the world together and choosing to live without them. That is what it means to stop caring. The candle flickered lower. Shadows swallowed the edges of the room. You came here, he said, seeking wisdom. But wisdom is not comfort, it's corrosion. It strips away everything that made you human until only truth remains. And truth is not warm. It is cold. Perfectly cold. He turned to the throne again. If you have learned what I have taught, you will not sit upon it. You will walk away. His voice was barely audible now. Because the final lesson is this: power does not belong to the one who rules, but to the one who can leave the throne and never look back. The silence that followed was unbearable. Some of the students began to weep quietly, not out of sadness, but from the unbearable weight of understanding. He took the last candle in his hand and blew it out. Darkness consumed the hall. Yet his voice remained, calm, eternal, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. When you stop caring, he whispered, they start fearing. But when you stop fearing, you become untouchable. A door creaked open somewhere in the dark. Footsteps echoed faintly, then vanished into the distance. No one moved. No one spoke. The throne remained empty. And somewhere beyond the silence, the forbidden teacher smiled, knowing that his final lesson had already begun.